All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Monday, January 31st, 2022 meeting of the Jacksonville Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. By my watch, it is 2 p.m. As many people are aware, we are governed by an in-person quorum requirement, and we have several commissioners on the way. So I just want to advise the public and those folks that might be listening in. We're going to open the meeting here at 2 o'clock, and I'm now going to put the meeting in recess for approximately 15 minutes until our fellow commissioners can join us. So thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to call the meeting of the Jacksonville Housing Authority back to order. Want to thank Commissioner Phillips, who was going to be attending remotely today, but got called in for last-minute duty in person. So thank you, Commissioner. We sincerely appreciate that. Do we have any commissioners on the line at the moment? Any other commissioners that have dialed in? Signed off, yep. Okay, hearing none, I don't think we need an approval for general consensus, but in the event another commissioner joins, if somebody could let me know, we'll circle back that item as needed. At this point in time, we're now at the public comment section of the meeting. I'll remind the public that this is 3 minutes each. We will need you to state your name and full address for the record for us. And we will start here with any persons in the room, physically present in the room. Is there any public comments from any people physically present in the room here today? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move to public comment. If you have a public comment and you are attending virtually or by phone, if you could raise your hand or make yourself known, we'd love to have your participation. So I'll open it up now to public comment to those online, please. Any public comments? Any notifications? Give it another couple seconds here. Okay, hearing none or not being notified of any, we'll go ahead and close the public comment section. At this time, we're on number 4, the agenda item, which is chair's comments. I do have a couple of items I'd like to share with the board today. The first 2 items I'd like to share with the board is some memoriams that I'd like to present to the board. We had a former director of this commission pass away, Mr. Emilio Zeller. For those of you that don't know, Mr. Zeller was actually a board member here since the inception of the agency back in 1994 and served until 2018. He was an immigrant here to the United States. He honorably served in the U.S. Army for over a decade, eventually achieving the rank of captain in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He became very active here in Jacksonville and the local politics, and his sense of public service and commitment to the city of Jacksonville is so reflected in the many years that he served on this commission, but elsewhere as well. So I'd like to go ahead and take a moment, if we could just have a moment of silence in honor of Mr. Zeller. Thank you. We also had a passing of a dear colleague with us here at the Housing Authority relatively recently, Sheila Craig. She was a housing counselor here with the Housing Authority for about 5.5 years, and she passed away recently with us. So we certainly give our best wishes, prayers, and condolences as well to her family. If we could also have a moment of silence for Ms. Craig, please. Thank you very much. A couple of things in the chair's comments today I wanted to address and put out there. The first is I wanted to congratulate, welcome back Commissioner Green and Mr. Alexander from the Commissioners Conference, which I understood was quite informative. Would love to, Commissioner Green, if you wanted to talk to some of the things that you saw there or have any comments on, if it was a worthwhile experience. And, Mr. Alexander, would love your thoughts as well, but I'll pause and open the table up. Sounds like a really interesting conference and some interesting thoughts.
Yes, it was a good conference. It was kind of eye-opening, but I feel like us here in Jacksonville, we're in a better place than most of them, because most of the housing authorities are public, a lot smaller, not in as great a financial position as we are. but also it's good to meet the vendors out there because that's kind of where you got to know the, some ins and outs on what you can do. And then me personally, I want to thank the other board members because they're able, I feel like I was a little bit ahead of the ball and knowing exactly what's going on because of the board members educating me about and Dwayne on the housing authority.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Alexander, anything to add?
Yes, my sentiments sort of echoes Commissioner Green. I thought it was very informative. I thought they had some very good hot topics with, if you're seeing your package, they created a PowerPoint on all the hot topics that commissioners need to be aware of for 2022. And at the top, most of the discussions was Rad, as well as building more affordable housing. So, but I thought it was a very informative conference. When you get to network to see what other housing authorities are doing and how they are repositioning their authorities. It seemed like HUD is really, based on the last pamphlet they put out there, really pushing these RAD deals to get public housing authorities to convert to project based.
Interesting. And that's what we're in the process of relative to several of our assets, correct? Mr.
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes, we have three, currently have three developments, close to 600 units that we have either converted or converting to RAD. For some strange reason, they give more fair market. The fair market rents are higher, and the Section 8 program than our public housing.
Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Alexander, on that?
No. We had some questions for HUD, and we can get a response back. Underneath the housing authorities, we have a fair cloth, which I mentioned in a meeting before. And underneath the fair cloth, they have a capacity of units you're allowed to have. We are about 100 to maybe 200 units short of that fair cloth. We lost these units in the past during redevelopment of some of our portfolio. So the cap, I believe, is 3,100 for Jacksonville. But the question is, as you convert these units from Section 8, from public housing to Section 8, do that free up that capacity underneath the fair cloth. So we want to get clarity on that, because if that's the case, then if we have 200 units that we convert from public housing to Section 8, do that free up 200 units in public housing for additional development of units.
Do we assume that that is the case, or has that always been the case, or we're not sure?
I don't think many people looked into it, but we're definitely looking into it because the RAD program is fairly new. So I don't know if most folks looked at that option, but we're definitely looking at that option. And then the other thing is that, which I really didn't know, was that fair cloth is transferable. So if it's somebody not using a fair cloth, and have no intentions on using them, you can transfer those numbers
Between PHAs?
Yes,
Interesting.
they're very interesting.
Do you have any idea of what the other agencies in Florida are, how much of their fair cloth allocations they're using?
I have to go back and check. It's easy to check that on the HUD website. I will have to go back and check just to have a solid number.
Yeah, that'd be a great data point
Yes.
for us to think through going forward.
Correct.
All right. Next thing on my chair comments, I have three more quick things. The first is I want to stress, and again, I thank everybody who's here in person today. I know Mr. Griggs had a conflict, but we have had numerous meetings where people are not able to attend in person. So I have, I'm just going to put it to the board so that they're aware. I have asked Mr. Alexander to reach out and see if, personal conflicts, change in circumstances arise. And I just want to make sure that our fellow commissioners are able to make the meetings. And if not, we look at whether or not that's a sufficient use of time. Again, we have a 4-person in-person quorum requirement. So I'm respectful of people's time and want to make sure that we're not, putting ourselves in a position where we can't accomplish business when we need to accomplish it. So I just want to put that out there for my fellow board members to be aware of, that I've asked Mr. Alexander to look into that. The next open item on my chair's comments is, yes, Commissioner Phillips.
We do still have 2 vacancies. Do we know what the status is of the vacancies?
Do we have 2 vacancies, Mr.
do.
Alexander?
They are currently on the board. We anticipated Mr. Mercer being back for this board meeting. He had a medical issue.
Mhm.
And as well as Miss Annabelle. But I want to confirm that they plan to either attend or step down from the board.
Okay. I think we're technically full up on,
Numbers?
yeah, I think we're full up on members if memory serves.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
very certain of that, but I think we have some, like I said, I think we just need to be cognizant of attendance,
Yes.
where we're at, and making sure that we have the time individually to dedicate. My next question, just kind of open, unless there's any other questions on that point. My next thing I wanted to address was, I know we've been having committee meetings. I'd love to hear from my fellow commissioners about how you feel those are going, if they're being utilized appropriately, what changes we need to make, if any. For instance, the governance committee did not meet this past session as there was nothing in front of the governance committee. So I feel like we're making progress on vetting things, but I'd love my commissioners, colleagues' feedback on, are we operating efficiently at the other meetings? Are we not operating efficiently at the other meetings? Things we can do better.
Well, I've been attending Green's Finance Committee meeting. I think that there were information in order to bring those recommendations to the board. And then the HR committee, I think there'll come a point when we won't need to necessarily have monthly meetings unless there's an item coming up on the agenda. There are a few things that we've asked them for that we'll be at the next meeting. But after that, it may be that I want to discuss a bi-monthly.
That's great. Okay, great. Ms. Brock, any comments?
Yes, as Commissioner Phillip has said, I have been attending both as well as finance, and they have been going well. And just as she said, we have a couple of things on the that we asked for documentation of. So she had said that if we get that we probably will move from having it much.
That's great. Mr. Alexander, are we progressing anything with the resident advisory committees? Have we had any meetings on that front?
Yes, they have monthly meetings. and
Fantastic.
We always attend those meetings.
Anything coming out of those meetings that the board needs to be aware of?
But Ms. Brock could speak to it better than I can, but
Yeah.
when normally we hear about complaints, we address the complaints. That's one of our main concerns. If they have any concerns, issues, or complaints or anything, we try to make sure that we address those issues.
Okay. Ms. Brock, anything in particular?
Yes,
Commissioner?
Yes, Commissioner Chair. Our resident relations meetings are every other month.
Okay.
Okay, so we had one in January that just left. One of the concerns of the residents is that the Section 8 program, that they are going out to find, places. And when they go out, of course, the landlords requires them to pay for, sometimes for application to fill out for that place, or they have to pay for not background check, the credit check. And so when that happens, and then they submit their paperwork, and the inspector goes out and that unit failed, then it puts our residents in a bad place, because they either got to do one or two things. They got to look for another place, or they got to wait for that one to meet the requirements. And so one of the things that the resident has asked, that is it possible that the housing authority, before they list the housing, can they inspect them first, and they pass inspection before they put them on our list? And that was one of the things that they were saying, that it would save the residents gas and money.
Mr. Alexander, how does, explain that process if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, well,
And is that
no,
possible?
I don't, that would be very challenging. Because a unit that comes on a program, clearly the landlord is given a script of all the things that needs to be done in here. Now, normally you don't have any problems with the unit because some of the landlords are very good at what they do and making sure that the unit is prepared underneath the housing quality standards. But you have some out there that may have some challenges in getting the units prepared. Someone just may not have enough income to prepare the unit. So we try to make sure that the unit, if it fails, it fails. And that's the housing authority responsibility to make sure that the residents are moving in a safe sanitary unit. But you do have that, and keep in mind that we do have almost 8,000 units, and it's a very small percentage of that. I would add to Ms. Commissioner Brock's statement that there has been some concerns that residents have been challenged with finding units because the voucher's not high enough. Our rents come through the HUD sets the fair market rents, and they just came out with a PIH notice stating that the housing authorities could take the fair market rent from 111% to 120%. Well, here's the caveat. What do that cost the housing authorities? That would be a big concern on how much could the housing authority afford to pay that, one. Then the second thing would be they only gave authorization for 1 year. So the logic is if they give it 111% to 120%, then it goes back to 90%. So that'd be a big drop. So we evaluating that, but clearly as these rents increase throughout the country, HUD has to look at it from a different perspective.
So to make sure I understand correctly, we're in a 1-year hiatus where they said HUD has confirmed that for a voucher,
Yes.
we can allocate the voucher amount to be up to 111% of the fair market rents.
Yes.
And then they're contemplating another increase or have done another increase up to 120% of fair market rents. But there is no guarantee that that will continue.
Right. It's between 111 to 120%, and you have to get prior approval.
So we would hypothetically be putting Section 8 tenants into a rent situation that if not approved, they would be anywhere between, assuming it's 90%, anywhere between 10 to 30% below or over budget, so to speak.
Yes, so we are walking through that, reviewing that whole process to make sure if we can follow through with any of that.
Commissioner Green?
Dwayne, does HUD set the rules for when an inspection can be done? Because I asked that, or my meeting behind that, if there's a need for more housing and we're maybe looking to bring in more Section 8 housing on it, right? Is there a way to get out in front of that or push the inspection costs on the landlord, the initial inspection costs?
No, because theoretically, when a unit becomes available, and we always encourage the landlord, and some of the landlords that have been on the program for many years don't have any issues. There's some of the new landlords that you may have issues with. But there's no way to be able to determine when they may have a unit available. And we always encourage them to make sure that that unit is done 100% because that fair, that housing quality standard inspection is what HUD sets in place.
What about a failed inspection? Are we able to put that back on the landlord?
That's something we can look
And
into.
then they can reimburse the tenant that way.
Well, if it fails a third time,
Mm-hmm.
then
Commissioner Brock?
Mr. Chair, when a unit, from what I understand, the housing authority inspects the unit twice. if the unit fails inspection twice, the third inspection, the landlord has to pay $50. If it fails the third time and they have to go out the fourth time, then the landlord have to pay $75, not the tenant, the landlord. They cannot ask the tenant to pay those fees.
Mr. Alexander, who sets those fees? Do we or does HUD?
Yeah, we set the fees.
The 50 and 75? I would perhaps encourage you to go back to staff and contemplate a bit more punitive penalty. If we're spending resources, I'm going to assume for the sake of argument that we're spending more than $50 in manpower hours to go out and inspect a unit for the third time, and then certainly more than $100 if we're inspecting it a fourth time. Maybe work with your staff to contemplate that and bring it before governance. I think governance would be the right committee to start dealing with that, thinking through what that looks like.
Yes.
That seems generous on our part. Okay. Okay. Commissioner Brock, please.
But one of the issues, like what Commissioner Green is, and I think I understand him right. One of the issues is that our tenants are struggling with that. They're struggling with those inspection failing. And so you have some tenants that, I'm just going to use it hypothetically, the day is the 31st. So they were supposed to be out of their unit, their old unit, the 31st. And so if the new unit failed inspection on Friday and it don't pass the day, then they caught between a rock and a hard place that they're going to have to pick up a fee to pay the old landlord. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, Commissioner Brock, it makes perfect sense. It's a timing function, right?
Mhm.
If old landlord and tenant agree you're going to move out on the 31st, but new unit isn't actually inspected and ready until the 7th, what do you do for those 7 days? Again, Mr. Alexander, I think I'd like, absence objections from the commissioners here, I think I'd like you to get with senior staff, talk about what this looks like, and maybe bring an adjusted proposal or a new proposal for that matter to the governance committee to talk through, we're not here to stymie or become difficult with our colleagues in the private sector, but at the same time, we have an obligation to look out for folks. And this is a financial penalty, which frankly, they're potentially incurring that has nothing to do with them. So I'd be appreciative if you could get with senior staff. Commissioner Phillips?
The initial comments by Commissioner Brock, I think, asked if there was a way for us to inspect the units prior to them going on the list. It sounds to me like that's the only way to ensure that we don't run into these kinds of challenges for the tenants. Now, I don't know what that looks like, or maybe the staff can find out what other housing, look at the process of people getting on. And maybe one of those requirements be that they do get a private inspection as a part of applying to get on our list or something like that. I don't know. Maybe we can look at some best practices of other agencies, because I'm sure it's not just Jacksonville that's encountering that type of thing. But to put a property on the list not knowing that it's going to meet quality standards, I think could be problematic. Obviously, if they're a known landlord who we have a history with, they have more experience and know what the requirements are and going there. But for new landlords that are getting on the list for the first time, maybe there's a way that you can do something, get a jump on it, and not be behind playing catch up.
Commissioner Brock?
And again, and I know Mr. Alexander will echo this, our landlords, they have a checkoff list that they're supposed to do when they come on with us.
Mr. Alexander, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to put out there that we do, it's been a little slow since the pandemic, but we normally have a landlord briefing where we come in and we bring the landlords in and sit them down, explain all the parameters of the program and all the expectations of the program.
Okay.
And maybe something like that prior to letting them get on the list. Bring them in, help them to understand what the expectations are and what fair housing standards look like. Before they get on that list, there'd be a requirement that they go to one of these seminars or workshops or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's Commissioner, I think that's a great idea. And so, Mr. Alexander, I'll expand on the previous request, which is maybe it's not just looking at the financial penalties and aspect, but it's looking at the process as a whole, as to how we're running this process or how it's been run, and look to see where we can improve upon it. Any other comments on this matter? Great. I have two more quick ones. The first is I want to address the Laura Street Trio. I know there's been some publications in the news, in the media. We certainly appreciate the press and the mention of us, but I do want to give an update to the commissioners. Mr. Alexander and senior staff have kept me informed. They continue to work with legal counsel to look at a variety of aspects of this deal. Outside financial consultants have been engaged to review per the acquisition committee's request, and they're still looking at the options around this transaction. So I appreciate the interest around the project, and I still think from where I sit, not speaking for the agency, but from where I sit, I do think there is merit to finding ways to structure things like this. But I want to be clear, we're still in the investigatory phase. We are still looking at this. There is nothing set in stone. I've heard concerns ranging from, we're going to bring, 1,000 units of public housing to the waterfront, the whole way to, the tax issues that are a concern. I just want to be clear from where I sit, talking with Mr. Alexander, being privy to some of the back and forth with legal counsel, that, those comments and questions and valid points are certainly being looked at and evaluated as part of the process. But obviously, it's not on the agenda here today, as we have nothing substantive to present to this board for their actual consideration. So I will say what this has done in a very positive way is all of a sudden, JHA being out there, this has, according to Mr. Alexander, and I hope you'll address this in your report as well, Mr. Alexander, opened up a plethora of folks contacting us saying, how can we help? What can we do? So we've been saying this since August, September of last year, that's what we had hoped to accomplish, which is generate interest in providing low income housing. And I think we're finally on that footing. So we shall see where this progresses to. Mr. Alexander, I'll leave it to you and senior staff to progress that along. But I do want to thank you and senior staff. I know that there has been a lot of meetings so far. And I appreciate that also too. I don't know, is Ms. Hodges on? I don't know if Ms. Hodges is on or not. Certainly from a legal perspective, her assisting and pushing this forward and guiding us has been much appreciated. So I'll pause there. Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners?
Yes.
Commissioner Green.
The development fee, we would pay the development fee. When would we pay that? Like
When?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the conversation, Commissioner Green, which is when and how much are those fees paid?
Mhm.
That's part of the financial analysis. If I understand correctly, is what
That's
we've
right.
engaged
Tag Associates.
TAG to perform. So at the moment, Commissioner, I have no specifics on that other than we're waiting on our financial team to give us some answers.
I was a little shocked when I heard the news. We were funding a portion of that project because I didn't remember having missed a meeting where we took action on it. So it was a bit premature. Excuse me. I don't know if you.
Well, because is there a way to structure it to where we don't pay the development fee until we receive our money back? I'm sure that's how it will be.
Yeah, Commissioner, you are correct. Part of what we're looking at is again, my understanding is part of what we're looking at is the timing and sequencing of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, there's my understanding from Mr. Alexander and counsel and financial advisors is should we elect to proceed and should we, this make viable sense to the agency and adding these units to our stock, the timing and function of how it is transacted is critical to the security of the agency and what money we may or may not invest in the transaction. And Commissioner Phillips, you are correct. The meeting we had was an acquisition committee where we authorized the investigation and further structuring of the transaction. Yes. I'll pause there. Any other comments on that one? And last but not least, Mr. Alexander, I wanted to acknowledge from where I sit, yet again, I read an article regarding some affordability, the lack of available units, what's happening in the United States with low-income housing. And I know you've shared with me some articles and sentiments. So I want to commend you and continue to encourage you to look at, other solutions, viable solutions. I assume our wait list has not decreased since our last meeting, Mr. Alexander?
No, it has increased.
Okay. And so obviously, as we continue down this path, I would love to see any and all developers or ideas or structures to address this. My understanding is that you either will be or will be presenting to the board, probably through the acquisition committee, a request for proposals, which will detail and outline a process where the outside developers and other agencies can bring us potential projects to look at. I look forward to seeing and reviewing that. I think that'll help streamline the process. Any other questions on these matters? Hearing none, I will close the chair's comments. Next meeting agenda item is the approval of board minutes from November 29, 2021 and January 6, 2022, which was a special meeting. You should have those board minutes in your packets. I sincerely appreciate Commissioner Phillips, yet again, you stepping up and running the board meeting on the 6th was very much appreciated. I have reviewed the minutes in anticipation of the meetings and I had no additional comments. Were there any questions, comments from the commissioners? I have a motion approval to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of minute approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? No opposition. The meeting minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Number 6 on the agenda today is the agency financial overview. Mr. Lohr, would you mind?
Good afternoon, Commissioner. The Finance Committee met on January 18th. For Jacksonville Housing, this is our first quarter of fiscal year 22, and for our 3 Rad properties, it's our preliminary year end. So for our year-to-date income, we have just over $3 million, which includes $833,000 from our Rad properties. So we're doing very well overall with our net income. Looking at our central office, we're over budget on our income, which is good, by about $131,000. So the central office is doing very well. For the central office are also under budget. So our total operating income is about $340,000. For our public housing program, we're actually about $340,000 over on our operating subsidy. So our income is over budget by about 3%. So, our expenses are about $500,000 over budget. So still pretty good.
Mr. Lohr and maybe Ms. Commissioner Green, why are we over budget 500,000?
Generally, it's from unit turns, drywall, cabinet, and also security services are over budget by $4,000. And if you remember, the contract that we approved for security was approved after the budget was approved, and the security contract.
Okay.
Compared to last year. So we are in the planning phase for doing a budget revision. So that'll all be taken.
Great, thank you.
Is the security contract, is it just all up front, recognized all up front, or is it amortized or?
It's done monthly based on actual hours worked by the security company. Looking at our Section 8 program, we're about 4% under for our admin fees. 4% for income related to admin fees. HUD does a proration, and we're currently a little bit low on our proration. Hopefully, as the year goes by, we'll get that proration picked up. Our expenses, we're also under by about 2.5%, about $151,000. So we're doing very well keeping our expenses in line. Looking at Gregory West, which is our affordable property, we're right on track with our income, and we're a little bit under budget with our expenses, which gives us a net operating income of about $86,000. So Gregory West is doing very well. Looking at Brentwood, our income is over by about 1%, which is a positive $30,000. And our expenses are under budget by about a 1.5%, which is about $40,000. And then our estimated reserves at the end of December is about $42.5 million. So our reserves are very strong. We always look at our quick ratio and our MENAR. Our quick ratio, our lowest now is 6.62 for our scattered sites, and our MENAR, the lowest is 7.6, which is very good. The HUD standard for these two is 4.
And ideally, what do we want, 6 or 8, correct?
Ideally, 6 or 8 is good. We're averaging 12.5, so overall, we can operate the public housing properties for about a year without needing any additional funding from HUD.
And then going back to the budget, I mean, the variance is supposed to be like plus or minus, what is the percentage?
Typically, we like to explain everything that's plus or minus 10%.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we were just looking at the maintenance contracts were over budget, and those were the things that were sticking out as the security, and then some additional unit turn costs.
Yeah, but even though it was over, it was just like 0.3%.
Right. It's
So
still
really good.
Really,
Right.
really close, yeah.
Right.
And then looking at our Rad properties, these are all preliminary for the fiscal year. The Waves is right on track with our income. Our expenses are a little bit over. We had some different bond issuer fees and some Rad related fees that pushed our budget over. And then for Centennial Towers, due to the relocation of residents and all of the work that's going on at the property, we're at 84% of our income. But our expenses are right on track with what we were expecting.
Mr. Alec.
I was just saying with the Waves, it was over 15%, but that's just a one-time fee. We won't have to deal with that going forward.
And that's right.
And Mr. Alexander, relative to Centennial Towers, when can we expect all construction to be complete? Do you have a drop dead date at this point?
Yes, that will be the end of this month.
Okay.
At the latest, the middle of next month.
Okay.
But we have planned for it to be finished on the 28th of this month, and we have already started working to.
And I'm sorry, do you mean February? Okay.
Yes.
I'm like, today's the 31st.
Oh, right. Yes,
End of February? Okay.
Yes.
And how confident are you that that'll be?
99% sure.
Okay. And so then, Mr. Laura, back to you then, we should see a normalization then of income.
Yes.
Commencing March, April of this year.
Yes. And then to wrap things up, we're looking at Hogan Creek. We're at about 62% on our income. This is related to the property closing late in June. And then the same thing with our expenses. We're at 66%. So overall, the property is doing very well.
Commissioners, any specific questions? I have one or two then. Okay. Could you go back to the estimated reserve slides for a second, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Relative to the public housing, $17 million in public reserves.
Yes.
Are those reserves able to be used for additional public housing rehabilitation of units such as beginning, HVAC replacements, window replacement, anything else that we need to do? Is that an accurate statement?
Typically, HUD likes us to use those for operations, but yes, we can use them for capital needs.
Mr. Alexander, any thoughts?
Yes, we get a little bit more than $5 million a year for capital improvements, and we have been doing an excellent job in making sure that we get all the capital needs addressed.
Okay.
With roofs,
Mhm.
we've done all the roofs in public housing, we've done all the roofs over at Blodgett, so we have been making sure that we've been getting many big ticket items done with that $5 million. It's been going quite a bit of ways.
Okay. And is there, I appreciate it's on our balance sheet. It looks great on our balance sheet, but is there a way to deploy the $17 million in a way that, adds value to our public housing properties, provides some sort of fiscal relief to our tenant? Is there a way to utilize that in some way?
Yes, it is. We have put an RFP out for a capital needs assessment in case we missed anything, and they would come back with a what we high level, mid level.
You read my mind, Mr. Alexander.
And I believe, Mr. Chair, that was something that we discussed a couple of months ago when you made that presentation, that we wanted to see prioritized lists
Mhm.
of what the needs were, the capital improvements that we might be able to address them.
Has there been a plethora of responses, Mr. Alexander, to the capital needs assessments?
Ms. Colleen, we get many responses for those P&As.
There were,
Okay.
And any anticipation of when we could expect, this week, you'll make a selection and move it forward?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Okay. Those are the only questions I had. Mr. Green, Commissioner Green, anything come up during the Finance Committee meeting we need to be aware of?
No, just one of the resolutions, but again, when we look to purchase a property, for public housing, it'll come out of the public housing, the 17 million, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Alexander, so you just opened up a train of thought, Commissioner. Thank you. Mr. Alexander, are there properties we could acquire for public housing?
We have been looking, and the acquisition team has been sorting it out, but we get tons of them every day. We get notifications of properties. We look at them all the time. We want to make sure we are getting the best property before we get back in front of the board, but we've been looking at tons of them.
Okay.
Tons of them.
And those we will pay straight cash
Interesting.
only.
And then refinance them.
No, I think we
No
wouldn't.
financing because it's public housing.
Understood.
We don't have any excess funding from HUD to pay a mortgage.
Interesting. Okay.
In the RAD, we would finance possibly
Okay. Same with
for an office.
affordable or anything. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Mr. Alexander?
Yeah, I would tell you that is a few C properties that we looked out there, but stock is limited. Stock is limited, but we've been aggressively looking.
Is the fastest way to serve the housing need go the Section 8 route?
Yes, yes. If you got a voucher, when we last checked, I believe we had 840 vouchers on the street with folks looking for units right now. We have about 98%, 99% utilization. Underneath the BASH program, just had a conversation with Ms. Hunt. We have those 100 vouchers with, for the veterans that we may place a newspaper ad for those vouchers. And then underneath the emergency housing vouchers, we have about 82 people on the street, about 82, and we are asking for more referrals because we have to take the same approach that we do with Section 8. HUD provides us with a 2-year tool so that you can be able to estimate how many vouchers you need to put on the street so that you can lease them up. And I think when we go, all of our referrals comes from the VA. So the VA may send over 10 or may send over 20, but we want to stage a day where we can get 500 veterans to come out and sign them all up and see who's interested. But we need to be able to put at least 500 of these out on the street to get leased up at 100%.
Commissioner.
It's gonna, Mike, it's gonna be sidetracked. You go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner.
It sparked something from the convention that I was gonna.
So Mr. Alexander, and I just want to make, again, I'm just trying to get context. We have over 800 vouchers that are out there looking for units that can't find units.
No, we didn't say they couldn't find it, but we have 100 people, 800 folks on the street right now with vouchers searching for homes.
Got it. So they may or may not find them, but they're actively searching.
Yes,
Understood.
we give them 60 days to find a place. And sometimes they may come back and ask for extension. We take it to 90 days.
Okay. And you're saying that ultimately our placement rate is somewhere in the very high 90s.
Yeah, 98, 99%. Just 3 months ago, it was about 101%.
Okay. Commissioner Green, you had another thought?
It doesn't have anything to do with finances, but I remember in the convention, they were talking about digitalizing and then having problems reaching out to residents. And it was something along the lines of communicating with them via cell phone and along the homeless people as well. And they have cell phones or providing, we wouldn't provide them with cell phones, but we would be able to
Good
communicate.
point. Yes, very good point. What came out of the meeting at one of the conventions is that most folks that apply for housing don't have a contact. They normally keep cell phones and they normally keep email addresses. Even if they lose the cell phone, they have an email address. So most of the time when you send them to an address, it may be, the mail may come back. So what they were stating is that, we try to utilize underneath digital processes, try to send more emails and reach out to folks by phone, because they did a survey to find out that 80% of the people who are looking for homes have a phone, but all of them have email addresses. But I did have a discussion with some of the folks here, and what I did find out that even though some folks may be homeless, they use the address at the homeless shelter as a permanent address. And that way, if the mail goes to them, it goes right to the homeless shelter. It's easy to get in contact because some people are very transient. They may be here for 3 months, over here for 3 months. So wherever they know they have use a permanent address, they may be able to use it.
Okay. Any other questions on the finances? Hearing none, I don't think we need approval of these. Mr. Lord, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Next item on the agenda is number 7. We have some operating resolutions. I believe that these are all financially related and one HR related with a finance component. I am going to go ahead and before we open them up, see if anybody has any conversation pieces, and then we can move on bonk to approve them absent a commissioner liking to separate them and discuss it specifically. My first question is, Commissioner Green, were these presented to the Finance Committee, reviewed and recommended for signature?
Yes, and they're pretty much standard operating procedure for the first 2. They always have to come before the committee to be approved.
Okay. And Commissioner Phillips, was the hazard pay discussed at a
Finance and at the
Yes, ma'am.
HR meeting, and I think that Ariel Cook will provide us with some information. I don't know if Ariel's on the phone.
Hi,
Okay.
I couldn't quite hear what you said, Commissioner Phillips.
I said, there was a question at the HR meeting that you were gonna look into, for us and provide us some additional information if you, through the chair, would share that with us.
Yes. So, we talked about this at the HR committee meeting. This is the resolution regarding hazard pay to the employees. And a couple of points came up. One is that this would be subject to bargaining. So the recommendation made to the HR committee was either to bargain it first or to add language to the resolution, just something simple like pending or subject to bargaining. I think another point that came up was the potential concern about having two different amounts. I think, I can't remember who specifically raised the issue, but a concern that the union may not like having two separate amounts based on years of service. So we just may anticipate some pushback on that. And then the third thing was they asked, I think they were planning to kind of simulate what was done in the city contracts. And so they asked me to look up what the city did, and I sent that via email, I think the next day. And so I'm just looking at it on my other screen. So what the city did in their contract was they did $2,500 to all employees, regardless of years of service. And so I had just sent that to the group, or I sent that to Mr. Alexander, HR, and Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. Commissioner Phillips, do you have a preference of how we handle this? Would you prefer it go back to committee until we have collective bargaining approval, or would you prefer an approval subject to collective bargaining?
What we talked about was having a subject to collective bargaining committee meeting, they can discuss. And it was me that brought up the question about if it was hazard pay. The question was, if it was hazard pay and all of the employees working during that hazardous, that continues to be hazardous period of time, how was longevity tied to that? I didn't understand how we got that nexus, and what I was told at the meeting was that we were trying to simulate what the city did, that the city had varying levels, and it turns out from Ariel's research that it was a flat amount across the board. And I believe Mr. Moore was asked to share with us if we did a flat amount, how that would impact the overall budget. Obviously, based on our reserves and the funding that we have available, we cover it, but there is an impact if we go with the higher amount for everyone versus if we go with a different amount.
Mr. Allen, thank you.
But it was
Commissioner.
good that we took it to HR because we were able to have that conversation and get some more information about collective.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Alexander, any thoughts on this?
No, but I did have a copy of the language that Ms. Ariel sent over, and it was exactly the language that the city had used. And when we did the split, it was, I think it was 90 folks that was in the union and 90 folks that was not in the union. I know that when we did it based on that, it came out to about $377,000. I'm not sure if Dennis, you had it for the, if everyone received 2,500.
2,500 would be about 500.
And Mr. Lohr, what, correct me if I'm wrong, these are coming out of COVID emergency relief funds, is that correct?
Emergency already.
Okay.
Have some extra.
Commissioner Green?
During the finance meeting, I had wrote down 377,000. What was that? What did that break down per employee?
I believe Commissioner broke down to 94 employees at 2,500, which is, was determined by those with more than six years or more of service, and then 95 employees at 1,500 for those serving less.
But now it's 560,000.
Assuming the board were to approve a full 2,500 for all employees.
Okay, some people are getting 15.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But if there only, how many were there that were getting 1,500?
There was 95 receiving a one-time payment of 1,500.
So then 95 would get an additional 1,000, so that would only be 95,000 more. 95 plus 77, take us to 500.
472.
472, okay. There you go.
Hmm. So I guess I would prefer that this gets kicked back to both HR and finance one more time. Simply because I think we have a discrepancy between the 6 and not 6. And then the real question becomes, do the extra 95 folks get an extra 1,000, or do the other 94 get, less 1,000, or do we split the difference and everybody gets 2,000? I'm certainly willing to have this debate here, should the commissioners like to do that, but I'm also sensitive to the value of the committee work. So I will demur to my fellow council members here and commissioners, and however you'd like to handle this, I am certainly open to that. Specifically, Commissioner Green on finance, and Commissioner Phillips on HR.
And then we also need to determine the time frame based on the collective bargaining aspect.
Correct.
That Ms. Cook mentioned.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, that's that. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we're all here. As much as I
Yeah.
have to be somewhere at 4, but I mean, we all are here.
Fair enough.
So I would just kick it back to the board meeting if it went to finance.
If the two commissioners that are chairs of this committee, or if that's acceptable to you, we can handle this right now. So with that said, how about this? Before we dive into that, are there any questions on resolution numbers 2022 JHA 3, JHA 4, or JHA 5? So this would exclude the hazard pay. If there's none, can I have a motion to approve those 3 resolutions? I have a motion from Commissioner Brock,
A second.
second from Commissioner Green. Any discussion on the resolutions JHA 3, 4, and 5? Hearing none, I'll call the vote on those 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? Hearing none, resolutions JHA 2022 3, 4, and 5 are approved. At this time, can I get a motion? Actually, no, let's not motion it just yet. I'll open up the commission for conversation around JHA resolution 2022 resolution number 2022-JHA-6. Any preliminary thoughts?
So the city provided 2,500 to each of the employees.
Ms. Cook, can you confirm that?
Yes.
Yes, so I'm just looking at my email where I had copied and pasted out of that CBA, but yeah, it's $2,500 for just everyone across the board.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Is the average salary for the city more than housing authority? Average pay?
Because of the mix of employees.
Yeah.
I think where, and I apologize, I wasn't looking to see if anybody else was speaking. I think where I'm sort of landing on this is, we just did a 3-year contract for pay increases, bonuses. Certainly am not discounting the hazard pay that took place, but I think assuming that the 377,500 was reviewed and approved in its totality by the Finance Committee. Is that accurate, Commissioner Green?
No, I made a motion subject to review of council that fits with JHA. So
Okay.
I didn't.
You didn't address
just kicked
specific
it
amounts. Okay. I think, and Mr. Lore, maybe you can opine to this, the 377,500 amount, what overall impact, do you know what overall impact this would have on our operating budgets and central office expenses over the fiscal year? Are we talking a 10% variance, a 3% variance? Any idea?
Right now, we're looking at receiving some extra funding from HUD for operating subsidy. which is phase down funding for our Jack's Beach property. And it's funding that's not in our budget. So we would use this funding to pay for the hazard pay.
Do you have any idea what the amount of that proposed new funding is?
It's around 300,000.
And then I'm assuming, let's just rounding it, 300,000, which leaves us a delta of approximately 77,005.
Right.
Which is covered via contingencies in our existing budget.
Correct.
I think where I come down, commissioners, and I'd appreciate all of your thoughts, is we would approve the hazard pay for all employees at a stated rate, which would actually be roughly $2,000 per employee. So blending the two, which keeps us within the constraint of the 377.5. But I'd appreciate commissioners' thoughts on this. Commissioner Green, any thoughts?
So basically, it would be 77,000 from our operating. I'm good with that.
Okay. Commissioner Brock, any thoughts?
Since my colleagues is in agreement with the 2025. Since all of my colleagues that are present is in agreement with the 2000 and not the 25, and I'll come on board.
Okay. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to approve resolution number 2022 JHA 6, which would include an amendment to the proposed resolution that provides that the employees are each allocated the pro rata share of the $377,500, whatever their pro rata share is, and that this resolution is pending any collective bargaining agreements and/or approvals.
Motion.
I have a motion from Ms. Brock to the same. Commissioner Brock? A second from Commissioner Phillips. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes as stated.
Chair, what would be the next step then as it?
Yeah, Commissioner Phillips, I think that's a great question. I'm going to ask that Mr. Alexander and our HR lead please get with Ms. Cook to ensure that we comply with any collective bargaining requirements. And should you need anything, Mr. Alexander, any additional approvals, we can certainly call a special meeting for that purpose if needed. You know, we don't want to belabor this any further. Okay. All right. Any other questions on these resolutions? I don't think so. Next, Mr. Alexander, your CEO report.
Yes, I'll keep it very brief. Which I basically spoke on it earlier. The acquisition team has been out for several properties. We were just looking at one for about 26 units, which is about a little more than $2.6 million. We're still going through that process on that property. We had tons of developers every day for the last 2 weeks. I have, ever since the talk about the housing authority getting into real estate, I've had developers come to my office just about every day to want to meet with me. There's some very nice properties out there, some plots of land out there that we could possibly consider. We do have, I do have all of the other development RFP that we had before. So I'm going through that, just changing the scope of work. We will put out on the street for a developer. And we also are putting out there for, we have a contract with an architect. So we want to make sure that we try to put ourselves in a better position to look at some of these properties as well as these acquisitions. 6 months, but then it's brought up for 6 months. We will have our budget revision in a couple months, and we'll make some changes, and we'll bring it from the board for approval to make some adjustments with some of the positions that we have, so we can sort of better structure ourselves for these deals. I would say that all the agencies that I've previously worked at, we always had folks in the real estate development department. I mentioned that to this board before. So it'd be all right and be a real nice thing to have at least 1 or 2 folks on the staff as a real estate development staff.
So, Mr. Alexander, can we pause on that point for a second? You and I did discuss this, and I think it's appropriate that we maybe have a bit of a conversation here at the board in the sense that if I'm looking at some of the potential fees that this agency would pay to third parties, forget
Yes.
the developers, third-party developers for a second, just us to do our diligence. It sure seems that if we continue down the path of looking at potential acquisitions or developments, it would make financial sense for us to employ someone with that expertise as opposed to paying
Yes,
what will be 6 figures every single deal. Is that an accurate representation of our conversations?
yes, very accurate.
So I would put it to the board that this is something that probably needs to go to the HR committee for their consideration, and also probably to the acquisition finance committees for their consideration. But I do think that that is something that if we're going to, bring units, low-income housing units online, I think it's appropriate that the agency has somebody that can analyze those deals in-house without maybe with a perspective focused on JHA's perspective. Let's put it like that.
Also, we discussed about the Hilltop. We just sent
Yeah.
another letter out on Friday requesting all the work orders at the site for each specific unit. So we just sent the letter out on Friday. We wait for a response back from them. The last time we sent a letter, we got over 100 documents. We went through every single document. We looked at every single document, and we thought that it'd be best to get every single work order that they have there. So they haven't responded back because we just sent the letter on Friday. And I think that would give us a better picture of some of the conditions in the unit. Now, I know in a previous response, they did state that they made a lot of improvements. Well, we like to be able to see that as well.
Mr. Alexander, has there been any more feedback from residents or other parties about Hilltop since our, engagement about 45 days ago?
Yes, I just received a letter from, I want to say the congressman, of a complaint that was sent to them that was forwarded over to us.
Specific to Hilltop?
Yes,
Okay.
there was one tenant that had a complaint, so we investigate that matter. And then since it's been out there, just about any complaint as it refers to these apartment complexes seem to have been coming our way. So I had another one that we are just looking at.
A different complex, Mr. Alexander?
Yes. What was the name of that complex? Cypress? Yes, Cypress. So we just received that today.
And is this one, so I'm going to go back one more second back to the governance committee. Do you have a process now in place to evaluate these and determine what level of action needs to take place?
It's not in stone,
Okay,
but we know the basic standard practices when you have a situation like that. We normally do go to the site and talk to the manager, walk around the site. If they allowed us access to a unit, we're going to the unit, but we go and investigate the matter immediately.
okay.
Yes.
And has there been any adverse impact on staffing or workloads having to do these?
No. The team, some of the folks that's on this team are on the acquisition team. We have Ms. Harris, who worked for public housing, is pretty good, and we have Mr. Mitchell, who is very good. He goes out there long, and sometimes both me and Mr. Law has been on these trips as well. In addition to many of the project-based developments where we have vouchers at, many of them have been refinancing their deals because the interest rates are real low. And I just wanted to bring to the board because they sent over these documents, which is a common document that the housing authority receive, because they want to lock in the refinancing based on the fact that the housing authority provides them a guaranteed amount of money. And we always provide them with a response. HUD looked over the documents, no problem, but I just wanted to make sure I brought that to the board's attention, because typically when we get them, we normally send them back. It's not something I've never seen before. I've seen several times, and basically because the interest rate is so low, the bank wants to know where you're getting your money from and do you have the ability to pay for it. And they want to have some proof that the housing authority provides them with a HAP contract. So I wanted to put that out there. Also, we're coming down the wire with our tax credit properties, where we have been doing an audit. It seems to be going extremely well. And the very last thing, we are planning our grand opening for April for Centennial Towers, and we're pretty excited about that. Those units, I would say it again, are some very beautiful units. If you get a chance to go over it, the building is beautiful. They painted the whole outside of the buildings, the units, the systems, the kitchens, everything in this is top rate. The Housing Authority didn't spare no expense on that building. That is a first-class building.
That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Alexander. If possible, and it doesn't violate any sunshine laws for any reason, I think it'd be great if we could have, a tour scheduled for the commissioners, and would love to have the RAB there as well, present. And, that sounds fantastic.
Yes,
So
beautiful.
that's great.
And lastly, I'll just add this in there. We'll be working on the elevators over at Hogan Creek. So we're pretty excited that these elevators has been breaking down, or have broke down over the years, that now we won't have to have any phone calls in the middle of the night about someone stuck on the elevator, because we're putting brand new systems in there. And I want to thank the board for approving this deal that makes a real big difference in the lives of our seniors.
That's fantastic. Any other questions, or any questions for Mr. Alexander?
A Rad is a light tech property, right?
Yes, yes.
Commissioner Brock?
Mr. Alexander, you say that our staff is doing an excellent job in all departments?
Yes, the staff are doing extremely well. All our departments are working extremely well. I'm very happy and very proud of the staff here at the Jacksonville Housing Authority, and I couldn't compliment enough the hard work that the staff put out here. And I think it's a very big statement, and I'm very appreciative of this board giving them an opportunity to receive some additional cash. I mean, we had folks here during this whole pandemic, and some folks had worked late nights and weekends. I explained to the board at the last meeting that we had an 8-inch main that cracked underneath Hogan Creek building. And we had staff come out 9 o'clock in the morning. Staff got their own personal trucks and loaded up water and made sure every single senior in that building had a case of water. And they worked until midnight to make sure that that water got back on, so those seniors can have some water in that building. We did have contractors do the work, but it do not take away from the fact that Mr. Mitchell, who is our director of maintenance, is a master plumber, and he had twice as much experience as the guys out there doing the work, as well as Kevin Godwin, who is our master electrician. These guys are extremely well and very rare to find out in industry. So I'm very thankful for them, as well as finance department and our property management department. I explain to staff every single meeting, our core business is housing low-income families, and our business is basically real estate, and we want to make sure that we are managing and developing and coordinating the best real estate situations in this town.
Any other questions for Mr. Alexander? Hearing none, we'll close out the CEO report. Any closing comments for any commissioners you'd like to bring up before we adjourn? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Ms. Brock. Can I have a second? Second by Commissioner Phillips. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the adjournment? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.